In the 21st century, there is often sorrow about the perceived leniency of penalties imposed on criminals. Even murderers can receive a relatively short sentence given the gravity of the crime. Historically, criminals were not subjected to harsh punishments. The ancient Persians believed in justice, and they rarely executed someone for a first offense unless it was a serious crime like treason. However, if you were sentenced to death in Persia, it would most likely be a lengthy, painful process. The Persians used several horrific means of death. Here are 14 of the deadliest. The skin chair. In the contemporary period, if someone in the public spotlight is convicted of bribery, there is a good possibility he or she will avoid prison, much alone any severe punishment. They should be grateful they did not live in ancient Persia, where they would have met the horrific death of Sisamnes, a Persian judge caught accepting a bribe and delivering an unfair decision. Unfortunately for Sisamnes, King Cambyses II of Persia, son of Cyrus the Great, intended to make an example of the corrupt judge and ensure his successor did not make the same mistake. In ancient Persian civilization, honesty was regarded as a virtue and a vital characteristic. Being caught in a lie was, in fact, a capital offense. First and foremost, Sisamnes was apprehended and flayed alive. Gerard David's 1498 paintings, titled The Judgment of Cambyses, depict the judge's horrific death. He is chained to a table, and a team of expert flayers remove the skin from his body while Cambyses II watches. Historians aren't sure if Sisamnes was flayed alive or had his throat cut before the grisly display. In any event, the executioners flayed off every inch of the judge's skin, which was then made into leather strips. The next stage was to put them together to form a chair fashioned of the judge's skin. From that moment forward, anyone nominated to Sisamnes' position had to sit on the chair as a reminder of what would happen if they took bribes. Finally, Sisamnes' replacement was his son Otanes. The death of Emperor Valerian. Valerian was the emperor of Rome from 253 to 260 AD and was imprisoned by his adversaries. Valerian was captured and imprisoned after the Romans were beaten by the Sassanids in the Battle of Edessa that took place in 260 AD. If he thought things were bad, the horror had only just begun, as the former emperor was subjected to the ultimate humiliation during his incarceration. Shapur I, the Sassanid leader, reportedly used Valerian as a footstool to mount his horse. It's unclear how long the ex-emperor endured this torture, but he eventually offered his captor a large ransom in exchange for his release. There are conflicting reports of what transpired next, as well as the day Valerian died. Some sources imply he was executed soon after Edessa, while others claim he lived until 264 AD. According to one version of the incident, Shapur treated Valerian as his personal slave and paraded him in front of his army. The Roman was shackled hand and foot and tormented like an animal. When Valerian offered money for his release, Shapur insulted the gift and poured molten gold down his adversary's throat. Shapur had the former Roman emperor skinned and packed with straw before displaying his dead body in a Persian temple. Lactantius wrote the complete account of Valerian's death, and it is probable that he inflated or even lied about the events. Perhaps the Romans exploited the myth as propaganda to portray the Persians as barbaric. Modern historians contradict Lactantius's version of events, with some claiming that Valerian was well treated by his captors and allowed to live in a small Persian city for the rest of his life. Suffocation by ashes. In ancient Persia, smothering someone with ashes was considered one of the most severe penalties. As such, it was reserved for individuals who had committed the most heinous acts. If you were judged guilty of God-related charges or high treason, you were buried in a little mountain of ashes. The Persians even had a 75-foot hollow tower erected specifically for this dreadful punishment, which contained nothing but ashes and wheels. The victim was placed into the ashes, and the wheels kept turning, while the individual was still alive to keep the ashes whirling about. The guy eventually died of asphyxia as a result of inhaling the ash on a continuous basis. The punishment was also not immediate. Because the accused was flung from such a height, it was natural for them to break a few bones on landing. As they writhed in anguish, the executioners spun the wheels so the inmate couldn't escape inhaling the ashes. There are multiple examples of this punishment being employed in antiquity. In 423 BC, a man named Sogdianus is said to have been the first to die this way. He was convicted of murdering his half-brother, Xerxes II. Another of Sogdianus's half-brothers, Ocus, later known as Darius II, carried out the sentence after promising Sogdianus that he would not die by the sword. Later, Darius II executed his brother Arsites in the same fashion, this time as a penalty for rebellion. In 162 BC, Menelaus, a Jewish high priest in Jerusalem, died in this heinous manner. Lysias, Antiochus V's regent, punished him for insurrection. According to the Bible, Menelaus's family was not permitted to bury his body. The article finished by stating that the penalty was just what he deserved. Scaphism. Also known as the boats, Scaphism, one of the most terrible types of execution, was only ordered by the king when he despised someone. The first phase was stripping the intended victim naked and placing them inside a hollowed-out tree or two boats. The person's head, feet and arms would poke out and be exposed to sunlight. The victim was then force-fed honey and milk until he had diarrhea and filled the trunk with his own feces. This was only the beginning of the ordeal. The torturers rubbed honey on the victim's exposed portions to attract insects and allow them to nest on the victim's body. Bugs ate away at the flesh, while wasps repeatedly stung the individual. Unfortunately, there was no relief for the victim, as the torturers would do everything they could to keep him alive by continuing the force-feeding process. At this point, the victim would be put into a stagnant pond while still in prison, and their mental state would worsen over the course of many days. Delirium eventually set in, and death was usually caused by septic shock since they were devoured from the inside out. According to Plutarch, one of Scaphism's victims, a Persian soldier named Mithridates, endured 17 days in his wooden jail. He was involved in the killing of Cyrus the Younger, but did not kill him, and paid a high price. After the victim died, the Persians would open the wooden trunk. One can only image the stench. Native Americans utilized a similar type of torture, but they did not force-feed their prisoners. As a result, the caught individual died of malnutrition within a few days. Torn apart by trees. Thieving did not pay well in ancient Persia. In most other societies, especially modern ones, being convicted of theft does not even result in an obligatory prison sentence. Instead, thieves are given lenient suspended prison sentences or compelled to do community service. To put it mildly, things were different in Persia. If you were caught stealing, you would face a horrible death. First, you would be taken to a location where trees were close together. Next, the executioners would connect the tops of two trees as close together as possible. The convicts' legs were then bound to the tops of the trees, one per tree. Finally, the executioners severed the cord. One can only imagine the horrific scene when the trees sprang apart at amazing rates. They would shoot vertically while the victim was still tied to them. The sheer force would tear their body in half. After the execution, observers saw part of the victim's body hanging from both trees. Saying it was an effective punishment is an understatement. The Persians would leave portions of the victim's corpse swinging from trees to deter other potential robbers. Whenever possible, they would look for trees near the heist scene. King Darius's revenge. In the 6th century BC, Persia and surrounding nations tortured rebels by chopping off their noses and ears. When a mutiny broke out against King Darius I in the early years of his reign, he went a step farther. He became king in September 522 BC, but within a few months, rebellions erupted across the Achaemenid Empire. Darius was able to put down the uprisings within a year, and in his own words, he murdered 8 false kings, while leaving extensive descriptions of the rebellions in the renowned Behistun inscription. Nidintubel of Babylon, one of his opponents, was impaled, as were 49 of his followers. However, this was a light punishment in comparison to what Darius had done to some of the others. For example, a rebel leader named Chikantakma was dispatched to the monarch. According to Darius, "I cut off both his nose and ears and put out one eye. He was kept bound by my palace entrance, and all the people saw him." Eventually, Darius impaled Chikantakma at Arbela. According to ancient texts, Darius ensured that the horrible punishment was openly displayed. Everyone who passed by his castle in Persepolis witnessed the disfigured bodies of the rebels. The lieutenants of the so-called liar kings were decapitated and hung from the pinnacle of Persepolis' citadel. The rebel commanders were mocked and battered by passers-by for weeks before being allowed to die. After crushing the rebels, Darius ordered that copies of the Behistun inscription be distributed to every country in the Achaemenid Empire. It was intended to convey to everyone that Darius was the indisputable great king, and that anyone who defied his authority would face the same brutal fate as the rebels. Despite his warning, rebellions continued during his long reign, including the Ionian Revolt. The Triple Death. In ancient Persia, some monarchs believed that an adversary deserved to die more than once and did everything they could to prolong victims' misery. They believed that for someone to properly die, they needed 3 deaths, each of which had to be horrific. Cyrus the Great founded the Achaemenid Empire, and according to one narrative, his wife ordered the horrific death of a eunuch. It is unclear how the eunuch enraged her, nor can I determine if Cyrus's first wife, Casandine, or his second wife, Ametis, ordered the eunuch's triple execution. According to the narrative, the eunuch's eyes were removed from his head, but he was able to survive. Next, he was flayed alive, but the queen refused to let him die and nursed him back to health. Ultimately, he was crucified. There are various reports of the triple death in ancient Persia. In some situations, the victim was only tormented many times before being let die. However, when the crime was considered significant enough, the consequences were horrific. When Cyrus the Younger was assassinated in 401 BC, Mithridates made the mistake of bragging about his role in the tragedy and was slain by Scaphism, as I previously stated. This was not the only horrific death suffered by anyone connected in Cyrus's demise. According to Plutarch, a Carian apparently hit the king below the knee with a dart, causing Cyrus to fall, strike his skull, and eventually die. The Carian also boasted about his role in the king's death, and Cyrus's mother, Parysatis, ensured he paid the price for his transgressions. He was placed on a wheel in the sun for 10 days. Following that, his eyes were gouged out and molten brass was poured into his ears. The headcrusher. Despite the fact that average civilians in Persia were subjected to torture, it appears that the royal family escaped punishment. In fact, if a member of the royal family committed a capital offense, it was usually their subordinates who bore the consequences. Artaxerxes II was king of Persia from 404 to 358 BC. He was the son of Darius II and Parysatis. The monarch had a problem. His mother despised his wife, Statera, and the feeling was reciprocated. While they remained courteous in public, they appeared to plot against one another so frequently that the monarch had to intervene to keep them from murdering each other. He even insisted that when they ate together, their food be divided in half and shared so that they wouldn't poison each other. Unfortunately, his tactics failed because Parysatis poisoned one side of a knife and instructed her servant to chop the steak with the poisoned half on Statira's side. When the queen died, Artaxerxes refused to murder his mother and instead sent her into exile. He not only allowed her back into court, but he also tormented his mother's maids until they confessed to their misdeeds. Parysatis' maid Gigis was executed, and Melantas, the meat cutter, received an even harsher punishment. The servant's head was shattered with a rock. When Parysatis returned to court, she wasted no time in indulging her vicious side. She ordered the execution of perceived enemies of the crown. One was flayed alive, while another was buried alive. Artaxerxes had a significant number of wives, estimated to be about 350, and at least 115 sons. The Persians may have used burial of living persons as a means of execution. Herodotus said that during Xerxes' campaign in Greece, victims were buried alive with their heads down in the dirt. The Persian Magi ordered the incarceration of 9 Greek males and 9 Greek girls in Thrace. Executions were carried out for religious reasons, not to punish criminals. Herodotus also recounted the executions of a dozen Persian noblemen on King Cambyses' orders. In his description of the execution, Herodotus claims that it was ordered for no obvious reason and is evidence of the king's reputed lunacy, which is confirmed by several anecdotal references. Herodotus also described the act of execution by burying the captives alive as a sacred ceremonial ordered by queens, including Queen Amestris, Xerxes' consort. Amestris ordered that 14 infants of Persian royalty be buried head down while still alive, as a symbol of appreciation to the earth's gods for granted her a long life. Aside from Herodotus's accounts, there is no corroborating documentation of burying the living as a method of execution for criminal justice or religious ceremonial purposes. Despite frequent claims of authenticity, academics disagree on whether the events reported by Herodotus actually occurred. He supplied no sources. Molten metal was used as a device for punishment. Queen Parysatis is supposed to have poured molten metal into the ears and eyes of anyone accused of lying. Molten metal was emphasized in ancient Zoroastrian texts as a means of determining the purity of an individual's soul, with it being placed on the body of those with a pure heart and causing no discomfort, whereas those guilty of lying and following the lies of others would find it harmful to their health. The narrative of Queen Parysatis using molten metal is certainly false, but many people believe that the Persians used molten metal, including gold, to punish criminals throughout the empire. The notion that the Persians poured molten metals into captives' internal cavities is most likely based on the account of the Roman Emperor Valerian, who was seized by Persian King Shapur I and exploited as a personal servant. Shapur reputedly killed his Roman counterpart by pouring melted gold down his mouth after several months of captivity. His body was subsequently stuffed and displayed. Roman authors who were opposed to the Persians fabricated the tale of execution by gold. In actuality, Valerian and his soldiers were imprisoned for a period and forced to work on numerous engineering projects around Bishapur, including the construction of Caesar's dam. When the dam was finished, they were released. Stoning was a common form of execution in ancient Persia. Stoning is an old type of execution that is referenced in several sources and is still used today, including the Old and New Testaments, the works of Josephus, Herodotus, and others from antiquity. Biblical descriptions depict the person being slain by being pelted with hurled stones. In Persia, huge stones were used to punish victims in a variety of ways, including interrogation and death after conviction for a crime. In one method, heavy stones were placed on the victim's torso, with additional weight added over time until the pressure was too great for the muscles to resist and the victim's breath was literally squeezed out. A similar procedure was used in colonial America against those suspected of witchcraft. Another approach was just bashing heads in with big stones, which was reserved for the lowest echelons of society. Servants and the impoverished were most likely to be stoned to death, and servants of nobility could be punished for both their superiors' misdeeds and their own. Because many of the nobles were related by blood or marriage, punishing them for crimes frequently resulted in enmity from other family members. In such circumstances, the servants became victims of Persian justice, which extended even to the king's family in more than one instance. The Persians practiced crucifixion as a means of execution. Crucifixion was a common form of execution in ancient times, particularly among the Romans. A victim was rarely nailed to a cross. Instead, the person was frequently chained to a crossbeam and suspended, resulting in a protracted, slow, and agonizing death as the weight of the body eventually caused suffocation. In Persia, it was common for crucifixion victims to have both hands attached to the upright pole rather than spread out on a crossbeam. Crucifixion was a terrible and humiliating death, often lasting many days. The Persians frequently permitted the humiliation to continue after death by suspending the victim's body from a pole or cross, allowing it to rot in public as a result of decomposition and animal and weather attacks. Various cultures, including the Persians, Mesopotamians, Greeks, Assyrians, Israelites, Carthaginians, and Romans, used crucifixion to punish heinous crimes. In Persia, the bodies of criminals and rebels executed in other ways were occasionally crucified rather than buried or burned. Some people's bodies were publicly displayed, such as Polycrates of Samos, who was executed and then crucified until nature disposed of it. Striping or whipping as a punishment. When magistrates found a subject guilty of a crime, they had numerous alternatives for corporal punishment, including maiming, blinding, deafening by penetrating the eardrums, and whipping at the stake, known as striping in Persian. In this regard, they were no different from almost any other society in the world. The practice of flogging miscreants persisted in the Western world well into the 18th century, and the amount of strikes permitted by magistrates was often astonishing, both literally and metaphorically. In the 18th century Royal Navy, 1,000 lashes were not uncommon for flogging throughout the fleet. The standard Persian sentence for beating a dog or otherwise mistreat an animal was 500 or 1,000 stripes. Stealing a dog might result in death in some situations. As previously stated, the punishments were not administered all at once. Instead, a period of recovery was provided in between bouts of punishment. The wealthy and members of noble families were permitted to send servants to undergo their punishment, saving their own backs as well as the idle time spent recovering from the lashings. The British Royal Navy continued to use similar sanctions until 1879, when they were discontinued.